fantasy, magic, knights, dragons, a red-haired protagonist. No, it's not fairy tale, it's Lord Marksman and the Vanities. It first aired in October of 2014 and produced by Starlight Studios, also known for Log Horizon, the Symphogear series, Hellsing Ultimate, and, wait for it, the original Fairy Tail series. But as for this show, I don't hear it come up a lot in conversation, which is sad, because it's one of my personal favorites. It's a simple story about a simple guy who just wants to keep his land safe from a power-hungry madman. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that, and just because it's one of my favorites, doesn't mean it doesn't have some pretty glaring issues. But we'll get to that later. For now, let's start with the positive. This is Lord Marksman and the Vanities. It's rare to find a series where all the characters are so good. Not good in the conventional way, where everyone is developed and built up to be perfect. Or even the Superman type of good, where they're all saints who can do no wrong. No, in this instance, good means, well, good. Most every character in this series range from okay to chivalrous knight. Even the bandit leader, who goes around destroying entire villages and enslaving their populations. His scenes range from comedic to fun.
So this means, with my remaining 30,000 plus men, I must defeat the army we've been fighting, and defeat Duke Thénardier's fleet, and secure the Southlands and keep control of the port town of Agnes? It's all just too much.
Sincerely express our respect for an honorably waged battle, your ability to unite noblemen and knights, and your heroism in defending your people. We can't forget your unparalleled skill with the bow, or the uncanny way your arrow would soar over the battlefield to its target.
Even the biggest villain of the series gives off this feeling that even he has his own sense of honor, and there are some lines even he doesn't want to cross if he can help it. Funny enough, some of the biggest jerks seem to be the rescued villagers. Oh, why didn't I come to save you sooner? Sorry man, it wasn't like I was coming up with a plan, so I wouldn't have to throw my small army of 200 against their army of 20,000. Jeez, the nerve of some people. Come to save them, and they start throwing their dead brother at you. You're welcome, by the way, for the food and the freedom. The nerve of some people.
What an asshole!
Really, there's only one character in the show that stands out as being a humongous piece of shit, and he gets dealt with before we even reach the halfway mark. Or take this guy. He looked down on our hero because he came from a poorer nation and used the bow as a weapon. But when Tigre takes down an assassin with barely any effort, he freely admits he was wrong and devotes himself as our hero's personal servant as a sign of respect. That's if, like Kaiba apologized to Yugi in the second episode and then decided to become his butler. And it's a good thing all these characters are likable, because, for all intents and purposes, this is a character-driven story. Lord Marksman and the Vanities, put simply, is a story about war. We start off with two countries at war, only for it to develop into a civil war. Just so, a completely new country can jump in, starting another war, forcing them to deal with that war before they get back to their original civil war.
My friends, it has often been said that I like war. My friends, I like war. No, friends, I love war.
As exciting as that sounds, I would say the story is probably the worst part of the series. Not to say that it's bad, but it's something we've already seen in one way or another. We have the main character with low social standing, surrounded by a bunch of jerks, who somehow gets a girl in a position of power to fall for him, and eventually is put in a position where he can prove his abilities. But despite the generic premise, the story works because of the characters. Of course, that isn't to say the story itself isn't done well. One thing I enjoyed is the clear difference the anime puts in the different factions. The two biggest countries, for example, Brune, and Zichet are given clear distinctions, which I feel is important, because a lot of the time, when two big fantasy countries are at war, the biggest differences between the two would be the physical characteristics. And it's not stated in the show either. You have to figure it out through small character interactions. Case in point, Roland and Ellen's first encounter. Roland is a knight of Brune, and Ellen is a warrior maiden. Both are the highest class warriors from their countries, but when they first meet, Roland is surprised by Elena's fighting style, which involves using her magical weapon.
Another unnatural technique? Your sorcery won't prevail against the blade of Durandal!
This, coupled with Roland's own fighting style and that of his fellow knights, leads us to believe that magic isn't as prevalent in Brune as it is in Zichet, which is weird because Roland and Tigra both have magical weapons. Another thing I like is that it does a good job making the battles have some amount of weight, whereas some shows just focus on the battles between the generals. The anime puts a heavy focus on how big the battle actually is. 500, 2,000, 10,000, all these numbers help remind us how big the war actually is, and how many lives it affects. It's not just a fight between two guys. Whole countries are involved. That being said, we don't actually see most of these guys fighting a lot. We only focus on them for cannon fodder or after the battle is over. However, they do get around this by showing us these battle diagrams. Every time Tigra or his friends go into battle, we are given a small diagram using 3D animation. All of it serves as an explanation to show the audience how Tigra and his gang plan to approach a fight. It's not a huge thing, but as stated, these battles involve up to tens of thousands of warriors, which can be hard to animate. So this is a nice little alternative, showing you how the battle's gonna play out without having to draw every single person. But let's start talking about the characters and story specifically. To save some time, I'm gonna explain the entire story using this chart, just to make things easier. It's a simple story about a simple guy. It's a simple story. It's a simple story. It's a simple story. The story revolves around two warring countries, Brune and Zichet. Each country has its own elite warriors. Zichet has its 7 war maidens, of which we only see 6. Brune has its knights, but Roland is the only one who leaves a lasting impact. In the first episode, we find these two countries at war, because that's what countries do? Well, okay, even though we never get a clear reason for their fighting, given what we see from each king, I think it's fair to say Mr. Grumpy here has something to do with it. In the first episode, we find Ellen, one of the 7 war maidens, and her armies invading Brune. This battle is the insinuating incident for the whole plot, because in this battle, 2 very important things happen. 1, our main character Tigra is captured and taken back to Zichet by Ellen. The second is the Prince of Brune is seemingly killed. As a result of his son's death, the King of Brune falls ill, leaving a power vacuum, which leads to a civil war, started by the 2 most powerful dukes of Brune, effectively creating a civil war in the middle of their normal war. Or at least they would, but as far as I can tell, the first war seemed to end as soon as the civil war began. Tigra, hearing of his small province being invaded, offers it to Ellen in exchange for her aid in protecting it, to which she agrees. After saving his home, Tigra begins to assemble a small army to stand against these new evil tyrants. It's also at this point that we find out certain war maidens have ties to the lords of Brune. One of these lords, posing as the king, sends Roland, the strongest of the king's knights, to kill Tigra. Tigra manages to convince Roland his cause is just, and Roland leaves, only to be killed later in a plot against the king. Then soldiers from a completely different country invade, in order to pillage and plunder. In the midst of all this confusion, Ellen is called back to Zichet to defend the territory of another war maiden, who's deathly ill, because her territory is being invaded by yet another war maiden. We also find out that the prince is alive, but she's actually a princess, and a childhood friend of Tigra. And all this time, the war maiden Sophie had been traveling back and forth, trying to meet with the King of Brune. By the end of this ordeal, the new invading army retreats. Ellen returns to Tigra, and Tigra assembles an army large enough to rival the other 2 lords, and even being backed up by the king's royal knights. With his newfound power, Tigra wages all-out war on Duke Nardier, the one who invaded his home in the first place, and the main instigator of this civil war. In the end, the Duke is defeated, and the other Duke quietly fucks off. The princess takes over as king, and Tigra hands over his land and goes to live with Ellen, as promised.
Everybody got that?
Now that we went over the story, we can discuss the characters, who are by far the biggest draw to this series. It's really hard to describe the characters as anything other than well, you know, good.
It doesn't make any sense.
Well, of course it does. It's smart. I used a thesaurus.
Even the biggest bad guy of the series, the worst thing I can say about him is he's a selfish asshole. He's not evil, he's not insane, he just wants to be king. And frankly, for a fantasy anime, that's rare. Usually, in this genre, the bad guy is one of the scummiest pieces of shit you could ask for. But Duke Nardier, not like that. His son, on the other hand, he is undoubtedly the worst character in the show. He's one of those spoiled, arrogant brats who got everything he wanted because his dad had power. He does have a name, but I don't care, because I prefer to call him
Sir Douchebag.
Now.
Sir Douchebag.
Is a very cookie cutter character. He's spoiled, arrogant, and looks down on Tigra because he was poorer and nice. And when his dad ordered him to invade Tigra's home, he did it with such glee. He even attempts to rape Tigra's childhood friend before Tigra arrives and saves her. In any other anime, this character would have made it to the end of the story to have a final confrontation with Tigra. But not here. About 3 episodes after we meet him, he gets killed off. And honestly, it's a bit of a letdown. This is the type of character you really want to see the hero get in the face of. But instead, Tigra vaporizes him from like a mile away, which admittedly is pretty cool.
Nice. Nice.
And speaking of Tigra, oh, what positive thing can I say about Tigra? Well, do you remember the last time I reviewed High School DxD and said one of the worst aspects of that anime was its main protagonist?
And to think, I always thought of him as a total loser whose only skill was coming up with unique and creative ways to describe women's breasts!
While Issei was a useless idiot whose sole motivation for fighting was the bad guy who would make Rias's boobs shrink if he didn't, Tigra isn't that. He's the polar opposite of that. That's not to say he's perfect. I could understand someone calling him as bland as Superman, but in a genre where most main characters are either complete idiots, unlikable, or both, it's great to see one character who isn't only a good person, but very intelligent, wise, and noble. And not only is Tigra a great guy, but unlike pretty much every other anime, he doesn't need to build up his skills as the story progresses. From the point the story begins to the point where it ends, Tigra is the best at what he does, namely using a bow. The only other anime I can think of that does this is SAO. But unlike Kirito, Tigra isn't a douche.
Yeah, I said it. You want some of this? Come on!
Tigra is the linchpin of the story. Everything that happens is because of him. Not in the Goku sort of way, where bad guys just appear for the sole purpose of fighting him. Here, I literally mean nothing would have happened without Tigra. In the first episode, I mentioned Tigra was a sole survivor. With only 3 bows left, he took his chances and attacked Ellen, and got captured for his trouble. Tigra knew the possibility and attempted it anyway. Coupled with Tigra's noble personality, caused Ellen to fall for him instantly. And she's not the only one either. He has a whole flock of girls interested in him. Oh, did I forget to mention? This is an ecchi anime. But unlike High School DxD, where the ecchi gets in the way of the plot, here is used more sparingly, and only for comedic effect. Like that old gag where Tigra keeps walking in on girls in the bath. Oh, that Tigra.
That's my pet. His name is Looney. Hello.
Ah, would you care to join me? This is the best way to wake up.
But to be fair, there are reasons for all the girls to want Tigra. Hell, some of the guys want Tigra. Not only is he charming enough to build his own army and talk down Roland, but he's smart. Several instances in the anime, you see Tigra come up with a plan to defeat or get the upper hand on his enemy. And it always works.
What Cyan had not realized, no, what he could not realize, was that the enemy troops to his rear were just 100 men. It was the horses that numbered 2,000. Lord Tigra used the terrain and setting sun to create the illusion of reinforcements.
Did you say retreat? We can still win this battle. What the hell's gotten into them?
Sir, there's a huge enemy force approaching from behind.
And his sole motivation for all of this isn't boobs, like some other dipshits, but to save his home. In fact, he does such a good job of it that it's even alluded to that he will one day become king.
You're dueling me with but a single arrow?
Hail to the king, baby.
Next to Tigra, Ellen is our other main character, and naturally, she's the war maiden we find out the most about, which isn't saying much, because all we really find out is that she used to be a mercenary and was trained by the war maiden Alexandra. But what we do learn early on is that she's very direct.
So, you weren't trying to make me look bad. It was strategic Ted craftsmanship.
No, the 3 men who made the boat did want to sabotage you. I'll have them beheaded.
Whoa, hold on! The War Maiden fell for me at first sight?
That's right. You could call it battlefield passion, an affection that only comes between close enemies. You know how people love gossiping about palace intrigue. And they're not wrong to do so. I really am mad for you, you know.
Ellen is a very refreshing character in that it's nice to see a female, or male character for that matter, just straight up say, I like you. I'm sick of this whole will they won't they relationship, or the secret crush from afar plot point. That's not to say her feelings are reciprocated. Tigra, for all the girls that are interested in him, isn't really interested in any of them, because he's married to his work. Still, that won't stop Ellen from trying to become his mistress. Next to Ellen, you'll usually find her best friend and second in command, Lynn. And if Ellen is direct, Lynn is blunt. The two make a good pair. Ellen is the happy-and-go-lucky warrior who loves a good fight, and Lynn is a straight-faced one who makes sure Ellen doesn't get killed. She also reminds me of a certain pony.
I want him skinned alive. Killing him would probably be the easiest thing, but that's just my opinion.
Was that a joke?
No.
Lynn is also one of my favorite characters. I can't quite place why, but there's something about her that just works. She's also the one who Tigra took the longest to convince he wasn't a bad guy. It wasn't that he was doing anything suspicious, it's just he was a prisoner who consistently kept trying to get back to his homeland. God, can he just sit still and get married to a beautiful war maiden like a model prisoner? Some people. We get introduced to a few other war maidens, but the only one of note is Mila. She could be categorized as a tsundere, but really, the only person she consistently acts snobby to is Ellen, and that's just because they were all training partners. But if you show her even the most modicum of respect, she'll treat you the same way, even making you some of her famous tea. The only other character worth talking about is Roland, the Black Knight. Roland is the best, and he knows he's the best. When he was first introduced, I thought he was going to be like Gilgamesh from the Fate series.
Who gave you permission to look upon me, you rabid dog? May your death provide me some modicum of entertainment, mongrel.
But no, as soon as he shows up, he starts kicking ass and taking names. But he also listens to what Tigra has to say. At first, he thinks he's a traitor for bringing a foreign army onto his land. But as the battle went on, he slowly began to realize that maybe this Tigra guy, maybe he's alright. And after Tigra unleashes his ultimate attack that brings Roland down to his knees, Roland's still able to move. However, he concedes and gives Tigra the win, even leaving his sword with Tigra while he went out to talk to the king on Tigra's behalf. Because he's a cool guy like that. And I guess this is just a me issue, but I guess the reason I like Roland so much is because he's a knight. Not only that, but a black knight that's actually an honorable knight. When you think about it, you don't actually see too many of those. I mean, who do we have? Saber? Okay, but she was a knight turned king who's now a servant. The Black Knight Berserker? He's a berserker. Lionel? He's more of a hell knight. Meliodas? Claire? She's more of a demon knight / mercenary. And Berserk is full of corrupt knights. But here, we have an honest to God, true knight, with the armor, the power, and the honor. Everything we imagine a knight to be. He's not a demon, or a guy in training, or someone who just dresses up as a knight. He is a knight, and a badass. I just wish he had gotten a better send-off. I spent the last 15 minutes talking about how great Lord of Marksman is.
There's something on the side of your mouth, Al.
But while I consider this show to be a lot of fun, like many other shows, it isn't without its problems. Most notably, the payoffs. Not to say the payoffs are bad, but they could have been a lot better. Roland is one of the best characters, but the way he gets killed off is rather anticlimactic. The fact that he dies at all is troubling, but the way it happens is so unsatisfying. For the last couple of episodes, we've learned just how strong Roland is. It took everything Tigra and Ellen had just to get him to stop, and even then, they had help from Sophia, one of the strongest war maidens. So after getting introduced to this walking tank and sticking with him for just long enough to get to like him, he gets killed off by bees. Not only that, but it happens off screen. Sure, they might have been magic poison bees, but they're still bees.
What is that? What is that? What is it? Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
This is probably the most egregious example of an anticlimax the show provides, but it's not the only one. We as viewers have certain expectations when watching a show. One of these is that when a plot point is set up, there will be a satisfying resolution. Lord Marksman's payoffs are debatable. Roland is just one example, but the resolution to the main antagonist is another issue. Take Sir Douchebag. He was satisfactorily killed after being shown how much of a scumbag he was. But the fact that he was killed was the only good part about that resolution. Remember, this is the guy who looked down on Tigra just because he was slightly lower on the social ladder, tried to destroy Tigra's home village along with all its inhabitants just to mess with Tigra, and even tried to rape Tigra's childhood friend. And yet, Tigra and him never have a final face-off moment, which I think detracts from the whole result. I mean, just think of when Goku finally became a Super Saiyan and squared off against Frieza. For the last 24 episodes, we've seen the cruelty and self-absorbed attitude that is Frieza. Killing villages, killing kids, even planets are nothing but his plaything. But here comes Super Saiyan Goku to smack Frieza back down to reality, showing him no matter how good he thinks he is, there will always be someone stronger. Now, erase all that and pretend the fight went like this. Kind of a letdown, isn't it? The same thing happens with King Douchebag. This guy threw an entire country into civil war, killed Tigra's surrogate grandpa, and even managed to shake Tigra to his very core. And after all that, they speak for about 30 seconds, and he gets an arrow to the head. No final speech, no climactic battle, no satisfying payoff. Well, maybe that's a bit harsh. I didn't hate the ending, but this was my genuine reaction to the final fight. You know, not bad, but could have been a lot better. There are other examples, like teasing all-out war between Ellen and another war maiden, but then just deciding not to. Or Tigra possibly becoming possessed by his evil bow, only for Ellen to literally beat some sense into him so he can knock that shit off. I mean, why even bother putting that in the final episode if you're not planning on doing anything with it? Another notable issue people might have problems with is the animation. For a majority of the series, the animation falls between average and gorgeous. I mean, some of these scenes look amazing, especially those that work to emphasize Tigra's skill with the bow. But every now and then, the animation takes a slight dip in quality. It doesn't happen often enough to detract from the anime, but it's something you'll probably notice every once in a while. I'm assuming this is a result of putting extra work into the fighting and CG scenes. In the end, it didn't really bother me, but I could see how it would other people. Lord Marksman and the Vanadis is a really fun watch. I wouldn't put it up there with the greats, but it's certainly worth your time. Great characters, fun story, cool weapons and concepts. Yes, it does have its low points, but what show doesn't? But in this case, its positive aspects far outweigh its negative aspects. I recommend you give it a watch if you get the chance.